Rosemary Sutcliff's The Eagle of the Ninth. Chapter 19. Trudeau's Gift. As they dropped from their ponies in the courtyard below, Marcus and Esca drew back from the parapet. "Only 3 so far," Marcus whispered. "Don't use your knife unless you have to. They may be of more use to us living than dead." Esca nodded and returned his hunting knife to his belt. Life and the urgency of doing had taken hold of them again. Flattened against the wall on either side of the stairhead, they waited, listening to the pursuers questing through storehouse and guardroom. "Fools," Marcus breathed, as a shout told them that the stairway had been spotted, and then came a rush of feet that checked at the door below, and then came on, storming upward. Marcus was a good boxer. Much practice with the cestus last winter had made Esca something of a boxer also. Together, weary though they were, they made a dangerous team. The first 2 tribesmen to come ducking out through the low doorway went down without a sound, like pulled oxen. The third, not so completely caught unawares, put up more of a fight. Esca flung himself upon him, and they crashed down several steps together, in a flailing mass of arms and legs. There was a short, desperate struggle before Esca came uppermost and, staggering clear, heaved an unconscious man over the doorsill. "Young fools," he said, stooping for a fallen spear. A hound puppy would have known better than that. 2 of the tribesmen, they were all very young, lay completely stunned where they had fallen, but one was already stirring, and Marcus bent over him. "It is Liathan," he said. "I'll see to him. Do you tie up and gag the other 2. The young warrior groaned and opened his eyes to find Marcus kneeling over him and his own dagger to his throat, while close by, Esca was hastily trussing and gagging the 2 unconscious men with strips torn from the cloak of one of them. "That was a mistake," Marcus said. "You should have kept with the rest of the hunt, not come thrusting in here on your own." Liathan lay looking up at him. His black eyes were hard with hate. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Maybe we saw the raven, and we sought to be first spear lest the lowland tribe claim the eagle god for its own," he said, between shut teeth. "I see. It was a brave thing to do, but extremely stupid. Maybe, but though we fell, there will be others here soon." There was a gleam of savage triumph in the black eyes. "So," Marcus nodded, "when they come, these others, you will tell them that we are not here, that we must, after all, have slipped by in the mist, and you will send them back the way they came, over the main ridge yonder, towards the sunrise." Liathan smiled. "Why will I do these things?" He glanced for a contemptuous instant at the dagger in Marcus's hands. "Because of that?" "No," said Marcus. "Because when the first of your friends sets foot on the stair, I shall send the eagle, here it is, into the tarn which lies below this place. We are still a long way from the wall, and you will have other chances, you or others, of the hunt before we reach it. But if we die here, you will lose whatever chance you have of retaking the Red Crest's god." For a long moment, Liathan lay staring up into Marcus's face, And at that silent moment there grew a light smother of hoof beats and a distant burst of shouting. Eska rose quickly and crossed, half crouching, to the broken parapet. "The hunt is up," he said softly. "They have done with the furze cover. Aye! Like a wolf pack, they close in." Marcus withdrew the dagger, but his eyes never left the young tribesman's face. "Choose," he said, very quietly. He got up and moved backward to the far parapet, unwrapping the eagle as he did so. Leviathan had risen also, and stood swaying a little on his feet, looking from Marcus to Eska, and back again. Marcus saw him swallow, saw him lick the cut on his lip. He heard the sounds of the inclosing hunt, very near now, the men giving tongue like excited hounds, and from the emptiness at his back only the plaintive cry of a marsh bird in the wind-haunted silence. He let the last violet fall from the eagle and held it up. The evening light, spreading as the mist thinned, struck on the savage gilded head. Leviathan made a queer gesture of defeat. He turned and strode rather shakily to the broken parapet and leaned over. The first of the hunt was almost at the gateway, and a shout from under the walls greeted his appearance. Leviathan called down to them. "They are not here after all. They must have slipped through the other way in this accursed mist." He pointed wildly, and his voice broke like the crying of a storm bird. "Try the woods yonder. They will likely have bolted that way." A confusion of fierce voices answered him, and a pony whined shrilly. He drew back from the parapet, as though coming hot foot to follow his words, and as the hunt flung back on itself, turned once more to Marcus. "It was well done, was it not?" Marcus nodded without speaking. Through one of the embrasures he was watching, the hunt streaming back along the spur and into the furze cover of the main ridge, men on ponies and men on foot, calling to each other, gathering others as they went, dissolving into the last shreds of the mist. He brought his gaze back to the young tribesman. "Truly it was well done," he said, "but keep your head down, lest any straggler should look back and think it strange to see you still here." Leviathan lowered his head obediently, and sprang like a wild cat. But Marcus, warned by some flicker of his eyes, an instant before flung himself sideways, half falling with the eagle under him, and as he did so Eska was upon the Highlander and brought him crashing down. "You fool!" Marcus said, a moment later, staggering to his feet and looking down at Leviathan, who lay squirming under Eska's knees. "You young fool! There are two of us and only one of you." He crossed to the two bound men, and after satisfying himself that all was well with them, tore off some more strips from the cloak that lay beside one of them, and returned to Eska. Between them they bound the hands and feet of the young warrior, who had ceased to struggle and lay rigid with his face turned from them. "We can leave the gag for a moment," Marcus said, when it was done. He picked up the eagle and began to fold it close once more. "Eska, do you go and make sure the ponies are safe. We shall need 'em." When Eska was gone, he got up stiffly and turned to the southern parapet. The upland tarn lay clear and dark now beneath the steep fall of the spur. The hills were blown almost clear of the mist, though it still scarfed the glen with white, and evening was coming swiftly. And somewhere southward, beyond those hills, not far now, surely was the wall. "Why did you come among us, calling yourself a healer of sore eyes, to steal from us the winged god?" Marcus swung around in answer to the furious voice behind him. "In the first place, am I so lacking as a healer of sore eyes? At least your brother's son will not be blind." He leaned one shoulder warily against the parapet, and stood gazing down reflectively at his captive. In the second, I came to take back, not to steal, for it was never yours. Take back the winged god, because it was the eagle of my father's legion. Instinctively, he knew that with Leviathan, as with Kotia, that was the part that would make sense. Knew also that it was better for the peace of the frontier that the thing be kept a private feud between himself and the tribes. There was a queer little flicker in Leviathan's dark eyes. So my grandfather was right, he said. Was he? Tell me about this rightness of his. When the priest-kind found the winged god was gone, Leviathan said, with a kind of defiant willingness to talk, my grandfather swore it was you who had taken it. He said you had the face of the chieftain of the Red Crest he had seen killed under the wings of the god, and that he had been blind and doting not to know you for his son. But when he had followed you and searched your gear and found nothing, we said among ourselves that the grandfather grew old and fanciful. Then Galt, the fisherman, found your ring brooch by the shore of the loch, and the bank pulled down a hollow place under the waterline. And later we heard a strange tale from the Wraith, where your sword brother was taken sick, and we knew. And my grandfather said, I was right. After all, who am never wrong? And he sent for me, for my brother had been savaged by a seal, and was too sick of the wound to go to the hosting. He sent for me and said, it may be that it is you who will hunt him down, for there is a link of fate between his line and ours. If it be so, kill him, if you can, for he has put shame on the gods of the tribe. But also give him his father's ring, for he is his father's son, in more than blood. There was an instant's complete silence, and then Marcus said, you have it now? On a thong, around my neck, Leviathan said sullenly. You must take it yourself, since my hands are bound. Marcus lowered himself onto his sound knee, and slipped a hand warily under the shoulder folds of the other's cloak. But it was no trick. He found the ring, which had worked round to the back, and drawing it out, cut the thong and slipped it onto his bare signet finger. The light was beginning to fade, and the great stone had been full of green fire, when he saw it last, was coolly dark as ilex leaves, lit only by a faint surface reflection of the sky. If the fortunes of war had gone otherwise, and Eska and I had fallen to your spears, you would have had small chance to give me my father's ring. How then would you have carried out your grandfather's bidding? He asked curiously. You should have had this ring to take with you, as a man takes his weapons and his favorite hound. I see, said Marcus. From the ring he looked back to Leviathan, suddenly half smiling. When you go back to your own place, say to Trudeau that I thank him for the gift of my father's ring. Eska's step sounded on the stairs, and a moment later he ducked out into the evening light. All is well with the ponies, he said. Also, I have looked round a little, and seen that our way lies down the glen westward. That way there is birch cover almost from the first, and moreover the hunt went toward the sunrise. Marcus glanced up at the sky. The light will be gone in half an hour, but much can happen in that time, and it is in my heart that we will go now. Eska nodded, reaching him a steadying hand as he rose, and in doing so, saw the flawed emerald, and gave him a quick, questioning glance. Yes, said Marcus. Leviathan has brought me my father's ring as a gift from his grandfather. He turned to look down at the tribesmen. We shall take 2 of your ponies, Lathan, to carry us to the wall, but we will turn them loose when we have done with them, and with good fortune you will find them again later. I hope you do, because you brought me my father's ring. See to the gag, Eska. Eska saw to it. Meeting the furious eyes above the gag, Marcus said, I am sorry, but we can ill afford to have you shouting the moment we are gone, lest there be someone within hearing. It will assuredly not be long before your sword brethren return and find you, but to make all safe, I will see that word of your whereabouts reaches the tribesmen when we have reached the wall. That is the best that I can do. They crossed to the stairhead. Eska paused to collect the tribesmen's weapons from the place where he had stacked them, and sent them, all save one spear, which he kept to replace his own, over the parapet, into the tarn below. Marcus heard them take the water in a stutter of faint splashes, while he bent over the other 2 captives, both conscious and hating hard by this time, to make sure that they had not yet contrived to slacken their bonds. Then they ducked through the doorway into the descending darkness. The strain of their escape had taxed Marcus to the uttermost, and the respite in the signal tower, short as it had been long enough to let the old wound begin to stiffen. He had to nerve himself every step, and there seemed a great many more steps on the way down than there had been on the way up. But they reached the bottom at last, and came out into the little courtyard, where 3 ponies stood with their reins over their heads. They chose the 2 of them, a black and a dun, who seemed the freshest, and hitching the reins of the 3rd one over a fallen timber to prevent him following, led them out through the narrow gateway. The last lap, Marcus said, drawing a hand caressingly down the neck of the black pony. We will break fast in one of the wall stations tomorrow morning. Eska helped him to mount before he himself swung on to the back of the dun. For a few moments, Marcus had all he could do to master his mount, for the fiery little brute objected strongly to the unfamiliar rider, snorting and plunging like an unbroken colt, until, seemingly suddenly to tire of the fight, it answered to his hand and set off at a canter, shaking its hand and spilling foam over its chest and knees. Eska ranged alongside of the dun, and they swung over the steep scarp of the spur and headed downhill for the woods below them. Praise be to Lugh, they are yet fairly fresh, for we've a hard ride before us. Yes, said Marcus, rather grimly, and shut his teeth on the word. That plunging tussle with his mount had taken most of the endurance that was left in him. The light was going fast as they swung into the long southward curve of the glen. The wind was surging through the birch and hazel of the woods, and overhead the sky between the hurrying clouds was kindling yellow as a lantern. A long while later, a sentry on the northern ramparts of the Borkovicus thought that in a lull of the tearing wind he heard the beat of horses' hoofs somewhere far below him. He checked his pacing to look down, far down, where the burn cut through its wild glen 100 feet below the fortress walls, but a racing silver-fringed cloud had come across the moon, and the glen was a black nothingness below him, and the wind swooped back, blowing away all sound. Curse the wind! There was always a wind, save where there was mist up here on the highest lift of the wall. Nothing to hear all day and all night but the wind and the peewits calling. It was enough to make a man hear worse than horses' hoofs inside his head. The sentry spat down into the dark abyss and continued his measured pacing. Some while later still, the guard on duty at the north gate was surprised by a most imperious beating on the timbers and shout of "Open in Caesar's name!" So might a bearer of dispatches announce his arrival, if it were at any other gate. But the few who came from the north, horse dealers, hunters, and the like, did not hammer on the gate as though they were the legate himself demanding entrance in the name of the emperor. It might be a trick of some kind. Leaving his gate guard turned out and standing ready, the optio clanked up to the lookout above the gateway. The moon rode clear of the clouds now, and faintly by its reflected light, the optio could pick out two figures directly below him in the shadow of the arch. The sheer drop of the hillside was in shadow, but there was enough light to show it empty of men, clear down to the white streak of the burn. Not a trick, then. "Who demands entrance in Caesar's name?" One of the figures looked up, his face a pale blur in the darkness. "Two who have urgent business with the commander, and would fain keep whole skins if possible. Open up, friend." The optio hesitated an instant, then turned and clattered down the few steps. "Open up!" he ordered. Men sprang to obey him. The heavy oaken valve swung smoothly outward on its stone socket, and in the opening, clearly lit now by the yellow light from the guard-room doorway, appeared two wild, bearded figures who might have been born of the autumn gale. One of them was leaning heavily on the shoulder of the other, who seemed to be supporting him by an arm round the waist, and as they stumbled forward, the optio, who had begun curtly, "Now what?" went kindly enough to steady him on the other side, saying, "Run into trouble, eh?" But the other laughed suddenly, his teeth showing white in the dark tangle of his beard, and staggering clear of his friend's supporting arm, propped himself against the guard-room wall, and drooped there, breathing hard and fast through widened nostrils. Clad in filthy rags, gaunt as famine, and well-nigh as dirty, scratched, and blood-smeared as though from contact with many furze bushes, he was as villainous an object as optio had seen for a long time. As the gate clanged shut behind him, this apparition said in the cool, clipped accents of a cohort centurion, "Optio, I wish to see the commanding officer immediately." "Huh?" said optio, and blinked. Presently, after a queer confusion of changing faces, of brusque soldiers' voices, and clanging footsteps in long wavering alleyways between buildings whose corners never seemed to be quite where he expected them, Marcus found himself standing on the threshold of a lamp-lit room. It flowered suddenly golden on his sight, out of the windy dark, a small room, white-walled, and almost filled by a battered writing table and records chest. He blinked at it. With a queer, dreamlike sense of unreality, a square-built man in half-uniform rose from the camp chair, and turned inquiringly to the door. "Yes, what?" he began, much as the optio had done. As the door closed behind him, Marcus looked at the stocky, familiar figure, the square face with the dark hairs growing out of the nose, and felt no surprise. He had come back to a familiar world, and it seemed only natural that he should find old friends in it. "Good evening to you, Drusillus," he said. "My congratulations on your promotion." The centurion's face was puzzled, and his head went up a little stiffly. "Do you not know me, Drusillus?" Marcus said, almost pleadingly. "I am," but light had already dawned on his old centurion, and the bewilderment in his square brown face became blank astonishment, and then lit into incredulous delight. "Centurion Aquila," he said. "Yes, sir, I know you. I would know you in Tartarus itself, now that I come to look at you." He came tramping round the table. "But what in the name of thunder brings you here?" Marcus set his bundle carefully on the table. "We have brought back the Hispania's lost eagle," he said, rather musily, and very quietly crumpled forward on top of it. Chapter 20. Valedictory. Towards evening of the day in late October, Marcus and Esca came riding up the last lift of the Khaliva road, having learned at Eberacum that the legate Claudius was not yet returned. They had pushed on south, knowing that they could not miss him by the way to wait for him at Khaliva. They were rid of their beards and reasonably clean once more, and Marcus had had his hair clipped short again in the Roman manner, but still clad in the tatterdemalion clothes of their adventuring, still gaunt and hollow-eyed and disreputable. They had more than once needed the permit provided by Drusillus to save them from the awkward charge of having stolen the army post-horses on which they rode. They were tired, bone-tired, and without any glow of triumph to warm the leaden chill of their tiredness, and they rode with the reins loose on their horses' necks, in silence, save for the strike of shod hoofs on the metalled road and the squeak of wet leather. But after many months in the wild aloofness of the north, this gentler and more friendly countryside seemed to Marcus to hold out its arms to him, and it was with a sense of homecoming that he lifted his face to the soft grey mizzle, and saw afar off, beyond the rolling miles of dappled forest, the familiar and suddenly beloved outline of the South Downs. They rode into Khaliva by the north gate, left the horses at the Golden Vine for return to the transit camp next day, and set out on foot for the house of Aquila. In the narrow street, when they turned into it, the poplar trees were already bare, and the way slippery with shriveled wet leaves. The daylight was fading fast, and the windows of Uncle Aquila's watchtower were full of lemon-pale lamplight that seemed somehow like a welcome. The door was on the latch, and they pushed it open and went in. There was an air of most unwonted bustle in the house, as though someone had lately arrived or was expected to arrive at any moment. As they emerged from the narrow entrance closet, old Stephanos was crossing the atrium towards the dining recess. He cast one glance at them, uttered a startled bleat, and all but dropped the lamp he was carrying. "It is all right, Stephanos," Marcus told him, slipping off his wet cloak and tossing it over a convenient bench. "It is only the Golden Vine that we are sprung from, and not the realms of Hades. Is my uncle in his study?" The old slave's mouth was open to reply, but nobody ever heard what he said, for his voice was drowned by the frenzied baying that rose on the instant. There was a wild scurry of paws along the colonnade, and a great bridled shape sprang over the threshold and came streaking across the floor, skidding on the smooth surface, ears pricked and bush-tail flying, cub lying dejectedly in the colonnade, had heard Marcus's voice, and come to find him. "Cub!" Marcus called, and sat down hurriedly on top of his cloak, just in time to save himself from being bowled over like a stoned hare as Cub landed with a flying leap on his chest. They slid together off the bench, with a resounding thump. Marcus had his arms round the young wolf's neck, and Cub thrust against him, whining and yelping, licking his face from ear to ear with frantic joy. But by now, news of their return had burst through the house, and Markapor came scuttling with dignified haste to one door, while Sastika ran in through another, still clutching a large iron spoon, and somehow, between Cub's joyful onslaughts, Marcus was turning from one to the other, greeting and being greeted. "You have not got rid of us, you see, Markapor. Sastika. It is like the flowers in spring to see you, the nights that I have dreamed of your honey cakes." "Ah, I thought I heard your voice, Marcus." Among others, there was a sudden hush, and Uncle Aquila was standing at the foot of the watchtower stairs, with old grey-muzzled Procyon at his side, and behind him the dark, austere figure of Claudius, higher on Emmianus. Marcus got up slowly, one hand still on the great savage head that was pressed against his thigh. "It seems that we have timed our arrival well," he said. He started forward at the same instant as his uncle strode to meet him. The next moment they had come together in the middle of the atrium, and Marcus was gripping both the older man's hands in his. "Uncle Aquila, oh, it's good to see you again. How goes it with you, sir?" "Strangely enough, it goes the better for seeing you safely home once more, even in the guise of a Tiber rat," said Uncle Aquila. His glance went to Eska and back again, "in the guise of 2 Tiber rats." And then, after an instant's pause, very quietly, "What news?" "I have brought it back," Marcus said, equally quietly. And that was all for the moment on the subject of the lost eagle. The 4 of them were alone in the atrium, the slaves having slipped out of their own duties when the master of the house appeared, and Uncle Aquila gathered both young men after him with an imperious gesture to where the legate, who had drawn aside from the meeting, was quietly warming himself at the brazier. In the general shifting, Cub circled for an instant to thrust his muzzle into Eska's hand in greeting, then returned to Marcus again. Procyon greeted nobody. He was a one-man dog to the point of seldom appearing conscious that other men existed. "He has done it," Uncle Aquila was announcing in a kind of triumphant grumble. "He has done it, by Jupiter! You never thought he would, did you, my Claudius?" "I am not sure," said the legate, his strange black eyes resting on Marcus consideringly. "No, I am not at all sure, my Aquila." Marcus saluted him, then drew Eska forward from the outskirts of the group. "Sir, may I bring to your remembrance my friend Eska, Mac Conoval?" "I already remember him very well," said Claudius with a quick smile to the Breton. Eska bent his head to him. "You witnessed my manumission papers, I believe, sir?" he said, in a dead level tone that made Marcus glance at him anxiously, realizing suddenly that there had been no real homecoming for Eska in this return to a house in which he had been a slave. "I did, but I generally remember men of other things than the papers I may have witnessed for them," the legate said gently. An exclamation from Uncle Aquila cut across the little exchange, and looking round, Marcus found the other staring at his left hand, which he had unconsciously curved about the precious bundle, which he still carried in its sling. "That ring," said Uncle Aquila. "Show it to me." Marcus slipped off the heavy signet ring and passed it to him. Of course you recognize it? His uncle stood for a few moments examining it, his face unreadable. Then he gave it back. Yes, he said. Yes, by Jupiter, I do recognize it. How came you by your father's ring? But with Sastika's voice rising near at hand, and one or other of the slaves likely at any moment to come through the atrium about their preparations for dinner, Marcus could not bring himself to start on that story. Slipping the ring back on his finger, he said, Uncle Aquila, could we leave that, with all the rest, for a fitter place and season? It is a long story, and there are many doors to this room. Their eyes met, and after a pause, Uncle Aquila said, well, both matters have waited long enough for an hour to make little difference. You agree, Claudius? The Egyptian nodded. Most assuredly I agree. In your watchtower, after we have eaten, we shall be safe from interruption. Then Marcus shall make his full report. Suddenly his face crinkled into 1,000-creased smile, and with a swift change of manner that seemed to draw a silken curtain over the whole affair of the lost eagle, shutting it decently from view until the time came to take it out again and deal with it, he turned to Marcus. It seems always that I visit this house at a happy hour. The last time it was Cub who came back, and this time it is you, but the reunion remains the same. Marcus looked down at Cub, who was leaning against him, head up and eyes half closed in ecstasy. We are glad to be together, Cub, and I, he said. So it seems. It is almost past believing that a wolf should be so much a friend. Was he greatly more difficult than a hound in the making? I think he was more stubborn, certainly fiercer to handle, but it was Eska rather than I who had the making of him. He is the expert. Of course. The legate turned to Eska. You come of the Brigantes, do you not? More than once I have seen Cub's brethren running among the dog packs of your tribe, and wondered how. But Marcus heard no more. He had stooped quickly, and was running an exploring hand over the young wolf, suddenly aware of something that he had not really taken in the first flush of homecoming. Uncle Aquila, what have you done to Cub? He is nothing but skin and bone. We have done nothing to Cub, said Uncle Aquila, in accents of acute disgust. Cub has been breaking his own wilful heart for his own amusement. Since you left, he has refused food from any but that cheat Kotia, and since her going, he has preferred to starve. That brute has been deliberately dying in our midst, with the entire household buzzing around him like blowflies round a stranded fish. Marcus's caressing hand had checked on Cub's neck, and something seemed to twist and turn cold inside him. Kotia, he said. Where has Kotia gone? He had scarcely thought of her, save twice in all the months he had been away, but it seemed a long, long time before his uncle answered. Only to Aqua Sulis for the winter. Her Aunt Valeria discovered a need to take the waters and shifted the whole household a few days ago. Marcus let go the breath that he had been holding. He began to play with Cub's ears, drawing them again and again through his fingers. Did she leave any word for me? She came to me in a fine flaming passion the day before she was swept away to bring back your bracelet. Did you tell her about keeping it? I did not. Some things are best unsaid until the need comes for saying them. I told her that since you had left it in her charge, it seemed to me best that she keep it until she came back in the spring and could give it into your hands. I also promised to tell you that she would guard it well through the winter. He held one great blue-veined hand. to the warmth of the brazier and smiled at it. She is a vixen, the little one, but a faithful vixen. Yes, Marcus, yes. Sir, with your leave, I will take the cub and feed him now. Aska, who had been answering the legate's question about the taming of wolf cubs, said quickly, I will take him. Maybe if we both take him, we can wash off some of the journey while we're about it. We have time for that, Uncle Aquila. Time and to spare, said his uncle. Dinner will doubtless be put back to Jupiter knows what hour, while Sestica ransacks her store shelves for your benefit. Uncle Aquila was perfectly right. For Marcus's benefit, Sestica ransacked her store shelves with joyful abandon, and the sad thing was that it was all as good as wasted. To Marcus, at all events, that dinner was completely unreal. He was so tired that the soft light of the palm oil lamps seemed a golden fog, and he tasted nothing of what he ate, and scarcely even noticed the handful of rain-wet autumn crocuses with Sestica, proud of her knowledge of Roman ways, had scattered on the table. It seemed odd, after so many meals eaten in the open or squatting beside peat fires, to eat at a civilized table again, to see the clean-shaven faces of the other men, and the tunics of soft white wool that they wore, Aska's a borrowed one for his own, to hear the quiet clipped voices of his uncle and the legate when they spoke to each other. Very odd, like something out of another world, a familiar world grown suddenly unfamiliar. He had almost forgotten what to do with his napkin. Only Aska, clearly finding it strange and uncomfortable to eat while reclining on his left elbow, seemed real in the queer, brittle unreality. It was an uneasy meal, eaten without lingering and almost in silence, for the minds of all four were on one subject, carefully shut away behind its silken curtain, but making it hopeless to try to talk of something else. A strange homecoming meal, with the shadow of the lost eagle brooding over it, and Marcus was thankful when he at last, Uncle Aquila, sat down the cup after pouring the final oblation, and said, Shall we go up to my study now? Following the two older men, and once again carrying the eagle, Marcus had mounted 4 or 5 of the watchtower steps before he realized that Aska was not coming up behind, and looking back he saw him still standing at the foot of the stairs. I think that I will not come, Aska said. Not come? But you must come. Aska shook his head. It is between you and your uncle and the legate. Followed, as ever, by Cub, Marcus came down the few steps again. It is between the 4 of us. What maggot has got into your head, Aska? I think that I should not go to your uncle's private sanctum, Aska said stubbornly. I've been a slave in his house. You are not a slave now. No, I am your freed man now. It is strange. I never thought of that until this evening. Marcus had never thought of it either, but he knew that it was true. You could give a slave his freedom, but nothing could undo the fact that he had been a slave, and between him, a freed man, and any free man who had ever been unfree, there would still be a difference. Wherever the Roman way of life held good, that difference would be there. That was why it had not mattered all these months that they had been away. That was why it mattered now. Suddenly he felt baffled and helpless. You did not feel like this before. We went north. How is it altered now? That was at the beginning. I had not had time to understand. I knew only that I was free. A hound slipped from the leash, and we were going away from it, all in the morning. Now we have come back. Yes, they had come back, and the thing had got to be faced, and faced at once. On a sudden impulse, Marcus reached out his free hand and caught his friend's shoulder, not at all gently. "Listen to me," he said. "Are you going to live all the rest of your life as though you had taken a whipping and could not forget it? Because if you are, I am sorry for you. You don't like being a freed man, do you? Well, I don't like being lame. That makes two of us, and the only thing we can do about it, you and I, is to learn to carry the scars lightly." He gave the shoulder a friendly shake and dropped his hand. "Come up with me now, Eska." Eska did not answer for a moment, and then slowly his head went up, and his eyes wore the dancing look they always wore in action. "I will come," he said. When they emerged into Uncle Aquila's watchtower, the two older men were standing over the wrought iron brazier that glowed red in its alcove at the far side of the room. They looked round as Marcus and Eska entered, but nobody spoke. Only the rain whispered softly, delicately, against the narrow windows. The small, lamplit room seemed very remote from the world, very tall above it. Marcus had a sense of immense depths dropping away beneath him in the darkness, as though, if he went to the window, he might look down and see Orion swimming like a fish below him. "Well?" said Uncle Aquila at last, and the world fell sharply into the silence like a pebble dropping into a pool. Marcus crossed to the writing table and set his bundle down upon it. How pathetic and shapeless it seemed, a bundle that might contain boots or washing. "It has lost its wings," he said. "That is why it bulks so small." The silken curtain had been drawn back now, and with it was gone the brittle surface of ordinariness that they had kept all evening. "So the rumor was a true one," the legate said. Marcus nodded and began to undo the shapeless mass. He turned back the last fold, and there, amid the tumble of tattered violet cloth, the lost eagle stood, squat and undignified, but oddly powerful on its splayed legs. The empty wing sockets were very black in the lamplight which kindled its gilded feathers to the strong yellow of gorse flowers. There was a furious pride about the unreared head. Wingless it might be, fallen from its old estate, but it was an eagle still, and out of its 12-year captivity it had returned to its own people. For a long moment nobody spoke, and then Uncle Aquila said, "Shall we sit down to this?" Marcus folded up thankfully on one end of the bench which Eska had drawn to the table, for his unsound leg had begun to shake under him. He was warmly aware of Cub's chin settling contentedly on his foot, and Eska sitting beside him as he began to make his report. He made it clearly and carefully, abating nothing of the stories told him by Gurn the hunter and by old Tredoy, though parts of them were hard in the telling. At the appropriate places he handed over to Eska to speak for himself, and all the time his eyes never left the legate's intent face. The legate sat leaning forward a little in Uncle Aquila's great chair, his arms crossed on the table before him, his face with the red wheal of his helmet rim still faintly showing on his forehead, like an intent golden mask against the shadows behind. No one moved or spoke when the report was finished. Marcus himself sat very still, searching into the long black eyes for their verdict. The rain sharpened to a little impatient spatter against the window. Then Claudius, Hieron, Aeneas shifted, and the spell of stillness was broken. Then Claudius, Hieron, Emmianus shifted, and the spell of stillness was broken. "You have done well, both of you," he said, and his gaze moved from Marcus to Aska, and back again, drawing them both in. "Thanks to you, a weapon which might one day have been used against the Empire will never be used. I salute two very courageous lunatics." "And the Legion?" "No," said the legate. "I am sorry." So Marcus had his verdict. It was thumbs down for the 9th Legion. He had thought that he had accepted that from the night when he had heard Gurn's story. Now he knew that he had never quite accepted it. In his heart of hearts, he had clung, against all reason, to the hope that his own judgment was wrong after all. He made one desperate appeal for his father's legion, knowing, as he did so, that it was hopeless. "Sir, there were upward of 3 cohorts who were not with the legion when it marched north. Many legions have been reformed from fewer survivors than that if the eagle was still in Roman hands. Those cohorts were broken up 12 years ago and distributed among other legions of the Empire," the legate said very kindly. "By now more than half the men will have finished their military service, and those that have not will have changed their allegiance to their new eagles long ago. On your own showing, the name and number of the 9th Hispania is no heritage for a new legion to carry. It is better that it be forgotten. There is no way back through the waters of Lethe." Behind the legate's words, Marcus seemed to hear Gurn the hunter. No way back through the waters of Lethe. No way back. Uncle Aquila crashed up from the table. "And what of their last stand that Marcus has just told us of? Is not that a heritage fit for any legion?" The legate turned a little in his chair to look up at him. "The conduct of a few score men cannot counterbalance the conduct of the whole legion," he said. "You must see that, Aquila, even though one of them was your brother." Uncle Aquila grunted savagely, and the legate turned back to Marcus. "How many people know that the eagle has been brought back?" "South of the wall, we 4, your own camp commandant, who, I gather, knew of the matter from yourself and the commander of the garrison at Borcovicus. He was my old second at Isca Dumnoniorum, and gained his cohort for his defense of the fort after I was wounded. We took pains that no one else in Borcovicus could know what it was all about, and he will say nothing unless I give him leave. Rumor may come down from the north, of course, but if so, I imagine that it will die out as the earlier rumor did." "Well enough," said the legate. "Naturally, I shall lay the whole matter before the Senate, but I have no doubt of their verdict." Uncle Aquila made a small, expressive gesture, as though screwing something up and tossing it into the brazier. "What do you suggest becomes of this?" He nodded to the defiant, squatting eagle. "Give it honorable burial," said the legate. "Where?" Marcus demanded, huskily, after a moment. "Why not here in Caliva? 5 roads meet here, and the legions are forever passing by, while the place itself is the territory of no particular legion." He leaned forward to brush the gilded feathers lightly with one finger, his face thoughtful in the lamplight. "So long as Rome lasts, the eagles will pass and repass under the walls of Caliva. What better place for it to lie?" Uncle Aquila said, "When I had this house built, There had lately been a flare-up of unrest hereabout, and I had a small hiding-place made under the floor of the shrine to take my papers in case of further trouble. Let it lie there and be forgotten. Very much later that night, the four of them stood together in the small alcove shrine at the end of the atrium. The slaves had long since gone to their own quarters, and they had the house and the silence of the house to themselves. A bronze lamp on the altar sent up a long tongue of flame in the shape of a perfect laurel leaf, and by its light the household gods in their niches in the lime-washed walls seemed to look down as the four men were looking down into the small square hole in the tessellated floor just before the altar. Marcus had brought the eagle down from the watchtower, carrying it as he had carried it so many miles and slept with it so many nights in the crook of his arm. And while the others watched in silence, he had knelt down and laid it in the small square cyst that reached down through the hypocaust into the dark earth beneath. He had laid it, no longer bundled in tattered violet cloth, on his old military cloak, and drawn the scarlet folds closely over it with a gentle hand. He had been very proud to wear that cloak. It was fitting that his father's eagle should have it now. The four men stood with bent heads, three who had served with the eagles in their different times, one who had suffered slavery for taking up arms against them, but in that moment there was no gulf between them. The legate stepped forward to the edge of the square hole, looking down to where the scarlet of Marcus's cloak was all but lost in the depths beyond the reach of the lamplight. He raised one hand and began very simply to speak the valedictory, the farewell, as he might have spoken it for a dead comrade. Suddenly, to Marcus's tired mind, it seemed that there were others beside themselves in the little lamplit shrine, notably, too, a slight dark man with a eager face beneath the tall crest of the first cohort commander, and a shock-headed tribesman in a saffron kilt. Yet, when he looked at the tribesman, he was gone, and in his place the young centurion he had once been. Here lies the eagle of the 9th Legion, the Hispania, the legate was saying. Many times it found honor in the wars against foes abroad, the rebellion at home. Shame came to it, but at the end it was honorably held until the last of those who held it died beneath its wings. It has led brave men. Let it lie forgotten. He stepped back. Aska looked questioningly to Uncle Aquila, then, at a sign from him, stooped to the segment of solid molded tessera which stood upreared against the wall, and fitted it carefully back into place over the hole. It had been well contrived, this hiding-place that Uncle Aquila had had made for his papers, with the segment replaced, and the pattern completed. No trace of it remained, save for one all but invisible chink, just wide enough to take a knife-blade. "Tomorrow we will seal it up," said Uncle Aquila. Heavily, faintly, into the silence, down the soft wet wind, stole the long-drawn hunting notes of the trumpets from the transit camp, sounding for the third watch of the night. To Marcus, still gazing down blindly at the place where the square hole had been, it seemed that they were sounding with unbearable sadness for the lost eagle, and for the lost legion that had marched into the mist and never come marching back. Then, as the distant trumpets quickened into the shining spray of notes that ended the call, suddenly his sense of failure dropped from him like a tattered cloak, and he knew again, as he had known in the ruined signal tower while the hunt closed in below, that it had been worth while. He had failed to redeem his father's legion, since it was past redeeming, but the lost eagle was home again, and would never now be used as a weapon against its own people. He raised his head at the same time as Eska, and their eyes met. "A good hunting?" Eska seemed to be asking. "It was a good hunting," Marcus said. Chapter 21. The Olive Woodbird. That winter was not an easy one for Marcus. For months he had mercilessly overtaxed his leg, and when the strain was over, it quite suddenly took its revenge. He did not much mind the pain it gave him, save it when it kept him awake at night. But he did most bitterly mind finding himself shackled by the old wound again, when he had thought that all that was over. He felt ill, and he was wildly impatient, and he missed Kotia through the dark winter days as he had never missed her before. Also, there was the old nagging question of the future still to be settled. For Aska the future was simpler as to the outward things at all events. "I am your armor-bearer, though I am no longer your slave," he said, when they discussed the question. "I will serve you, and you shall feed me, and between whiles maybe I will turn hunter, and that will bring in a sesterce from time to time." Even before the year turned, Marcus had spoken to his uncle about his old idea of becoming somebody's secretary, but Uncle Aquila had disposed of his capabilities to be anybody's secretary in a few well-chosen and blistering words, and when he proved stubborn in the plan, finished up by making him promise to wait at least until he was strong again. The year drew on to spring, and slowly Marcus's leg began to strengthen under him once more. March came, and the forest below the ramparts was flushed with rising sap, and the many thorn trees which gave it its name began to feather the wooded hills with white, and quite suddenly the house of Kaizo woke up. For a few days slaves came and went, scurrying about it. Hangings were shaken out of doors, and the fumes of freshly lit hypocaust fire blew into the slaves' quarters of Uncle Aquila's house and created unpleasantness between the two households. Then one evening, returning from the baths, Marcus and Eska met a hired mule carriage being driven away empty from the house of Kaizo, and glimpsed a mass of luggage being carried indoors. The family had returned. Next morning Marcus went down to the foot of the garden and whistled for Kotia, as he had been used to do. It was a wild day of blustering wind and thin shining rain, and the little native daffodils in the rampart curve tossed and streamed before the gust like points of wind-blown flame, with the shrill sunshine slanting through their petals. Kotia came with the wind behind her, up round the end of the swaying hedge, to join him under the bare fruit trees. "I heard your whistle," she said, "and so I came. I have brought your bracelet back to you." "Kotia," Marcus said. "Why Kotia?" and stood looking at her, making no move to take the bracelet that she held out to him. It was almost a year since their last meeting, but he had expected her to wait as she had been then, and Kotia had not waited. She stood before him, much taller than she had been, with her head up, and returned his look suddenly a little uncertain. Her soft golden-green mantle was swathed closely round her over the straight white folds of her tunic. One end of it which had been drawn over her head, had fallen back, and her flaming hair, that had been used to blow wild, was braided into a shining coronal, so that she seemed more than ever to carry her head like a queen. Her lips were touched with red, and her eyebrows darkened, and there were tiny gold drops in her ears. "Why, Kotia," he said again, "you have grown up," and felt suddenly a little ache of loss. "Yes," said Kotia. "Do you like me grown up?" "Yes, yes, of course," Marcus said. "Thank you for looking after my bracelet for me. Uncle Aquila told me how you came to see him about it before you went away." He took the heavy gold bracelet from her and sprang it on his wrist, still looking at her as he did so. He found that he did not know how to talk to her, and as the silence lengthened, he asked with desperate politeness, "Did you like Aquasolus?" "No!" Kotia spat the word between little pointed teeth, and her face was suddenly bright with fury. "I hated every moment of Aquasolus. I never wanted to go there. I wanted to wait for you because you told me you might be home before the winter closed in. And all winter I have had no word of you, save one little message in some silly letter your uncle sent mine about the new town water supply, and I have waited and waited, and now you are not at all glad to see me. Well, neither am I at all glad to see you. You little vixen!" Marcus caught her wrist as she turned to run, and swung her round to face him. Suddenly and softly he laughed. "But I am glad to see you." "You don't know how glad I am to see you, Kotia." She was dragging away from him, wrenching at her wrists to free them, but at his words she checked, looking up into his face. "Yes, you are now," she said wonderingly. "Why were you not before?" "I did not recognize you just at first." "Oh," said Kotia, a little blankly. She was silent a moment, and then asked with sudden anxiety, "Where is Cub?" "Making love to Sastika for a bone. He is growing greedy." She drew a deep breath of relief. All was well with him, then, when you came home? "He was very thin. He would not eat after you left, but all is well with him now." "I was afraid of that. That he would fret, I mean. It was one of the things that made me not want to go to Aquasolus. But I could not take him with me. Truly I could not, Marcus. Aunt Valeria would never have allowed it." "I'm very sure she would not," Marcus said, his mouth quirking as he thought of the Lady Valeria, confronted with the suggestion that she should take a young wolf to a fashionable watering place. By this time they were sitting side by side on Marcus's cloak, spread on the damp marble bench, and after a few moments Kotia asked, "Did you find the eagle?" He looked round at her, his arms resting across his knees. "Yes," he said at last. "Oh, Marcus, I am so glad, so very glad. And now?" "Nothing now." "But the Legion?" She searched his face, and the sparkle died in her own. "Will there not be a new 9th Legion after all?" "No, there will never be a 9th Legion again." "But Marcus," she began and then checked. "No, I will not ask questions." He smiled. "One day, maybe, I will tell you the whole story." "I will wait," said Kotia. For a while they sat there, talking by fits and starts, but silent for the most part, glancing at each other from time to time with a quick smile, and then away again, for they were unexpectedly shy of each other. Presently Marcus told her about Eska, that he was no longer a slave. He had expected her to be surprised, but she only said, "Yes, Nisa told me, just after you went away, and I was glad, for you both." And then they were silent again. Behind them, in the bare swaying branches of the wild pear tree, a blackbird with a crocus-colored bill, burst into song, and the wind caught and tossed the shining notes down to them in a shower. They turned together to look up at the singer, swaying against the cold-blown blue of the sky. Marcus narrowed his eyes into the thin dazzle of sunlight, and whistled back, and the blackbird, bowing and swaying on the wind-blown branch, its throat swelling with an ecstasy of song, seemed to be answering him. Then a cloud came sailing across the sun, and the bright world was quenched in shadow. At the same moment they heard a horse coming down the street, its hoofbeats ringing on the wet roadway. It stopped before the house, or before the next one. Marcus could not be sure which. The blackbird was still singing, but when he turned to look at Kotia, a shadow that was not merely the passing cloud seemed to have touched her. "Marcus, what is it that you will do now?" she asked suddenly. "Now? Now that you are strong again. You are strong again, aren't you?" Then swiftly, "No, I do not believe you are. You were limping more, just now, than you were when I saw you last." Marcus laughed. "I've been lying up like a sick badger all winter, but I am mending fast now." "That is the truth?" "That is the truth." "Then what will you do? Will you go back to the legions?" "No, I should do well enough in a skirmish, maybe, but I could not march my cohort down from Portus Itius to Rome at 20 miles a day, and I should certainly be no use on the parade ground." "The parade ground?" Kotia said indignantly. "I have seen them on the parade ground, through the gates of the transit camp. They march about in straight lines with all their legs working together, and make silly patterns of themselves while a man with a voice like a bull shouts at them. What has that to do with the fighting of wars?" Marcus hastily gathered his wits together to make Kotia understand what it had to do with the fighting of wars, but he did not have to struggle with the explanations, for she hurried on without waiting for an answer. "Then, if you cannot go back to the legions, what will you do?" "I'm not quite sure." "Perhaps you will go home," she said, and then seemed suddenly to realize her own words, and her eyes grew frightened. "You will go back to Rome, and take Cub and Esca with you?" "I do not know, Kotia, truly I do not know. But I do not suppose for a moment that I shall ever go home." But Kotia did not seem to hear him. "Take me too." Suddenly her voice broke almost into a wail. "They will build the city wall around here soon, and you could not leave me in a cage. You could not. Oh, Marcus, take me too." "Even if it were to Rome," Marcus said, remembering her old wild hatred of all things Roman. "Even if it were to Rome?" Kotia slipped from the bench and turned to him as he got up also. "Yes," she said, "anywhere at all, if only it was with you." Two distinct waves of feeling swept over Marcus, so close upon each other that they were almost one. The first was the joyful surprise of finding, and the second the desolation of losing again. How was he to explain to Kotia that possessing nothing in the world, without even a trade to his hands, he could not take her with him? "Kotia," he began wretchedly. "Kotia, my heart, it is no use." But before he could get any further, he heard Esca calling, with a note of excitement in his voice. "Marcus? Where are you, Marcus?" "Down here. I'm coming," he shouted back and caught Kotia's hand. "Come with me now, anyway." Rain had begun to spatter around them, but the sun was out again, and the rain shone as it fell. Cub met them at the courtyard steps, circling about them and barking joyously, his straight bush of a tail streaming out behind. and hard behind Cub was Eska. "This has just come for you," he said, holding out a slim, sealed papyrus roll. Marcus took the roll from him, raising his brows at sight of the 6 legions signum on the seal, while Kotia and Eska and Cub all greeted each other after their fashion. In the act of breaking the thread, he glanced up to see Uncle Aquila stalking towards them. "Curiosity is one of the privileges of extreme old age," said Uncle Aquila, towering over the group in the entrance of the colonnade. Marcus unrolled the crackling papyrus sheet. He was half blind with the dazzle of the day outside, and the written words seemed to float in the midst of red and green clouds. To Centurion Marcus Flavius Aquila, from Claudius Hieron e Neemianus, legate of the 6 Victrix. Greeting. The letter began. He skimmed the few close lines to the end, then glanced up and met Kotia's wide golden eyes fixed on him. "Are you a witch out of Thessaly to draw down the moon in a net of your hair? Or is it only the other sight that you have?" he said, and returned to the letter in his hand. He began to read it a second time, more carefully, taking it in, as he had scarcely been able to do at first, and giving them the gist of it as he went along. "The legate has laid that matter before the Senate, and their ruling is as we knew it must be. But he sees that, in just recognition of service to the state, which is none the less real, that it must remain unpublished." He looked up quickly. "Aska, you are a Roman citizen." Aska was puzzled, almost a little wary. "I am not sure that I understand. What does it mean?" It meant so much, rights and duties. It could even, in a way, mean the cancelling of a clipped ear, for if a man were a Roman citizen, that fact was stronger than the fact that he had been a slave. Aska would find that out later. Also, in Aska's case, it was his honorable quittance, the wooden foil of a gladiator, who had won freedom with honor in the arena, the settlement of all debts. "It is as though they gave you your freedom foil," he said, and saw Aska, who had been a gladiator, began to understand before he returned again to his letter. "The legate says that for the same service I am to be awarded the gratuity of a time-expired cohort centurion paid in the old style, part sesterces, part land." A long pause, and then he began to read word for word. "Following the established custom, the land grant will be made over to you here in Britain, as the province of your last military service, but a good friend of mine on the Senate benches writes me that if you so wish, there should be no difficulty in working an exchange for land in Etruria, which I believe is your own country. The official documents will be reaching both of you in due course, but since the wheels of officialdom are notoriously slow, I hope that I may be the first to give you the news." He stopped reading. Slowly the hand which held the legate's letter dropped to his side. He looked round at the table, faces that crowded him in. Uncle Aquila's wearing the look of someone watching with detached interest the result of an experiment, Eska's face with an alert and waiting look in it, Kotia's grown all at once very pointed and white, Cub's great head upraised and watchful. Faces. And suddenly he wanted to escape from them all, even from Kotia, even from Eska. They were part of all his plans and calculations. They belonged to him, and he to them. But for this one moment he wanted to be alone, to realize what had happened without anyone else entering in to complicate it. He turned away from them and stood leaning against the half-wall beside the courtyard steps, staring away down the rain-wet garden where the little native daffodils were a myriad points of dancing flame under the wild fruit trees. He could go home. Standing there with the last cold spattering of the shower blowing in his face, he thought, I can go home, and saw behind his eyes the long road leading south, the Legion's Road white in the Etruscan sunlight, the farmsteads among their terraced olive trees, and the wine darkness of the Apennines beyond. He seemed to catch the resiny aromatic smell of the pine forest dropping to the shore, and the warm mingling of thyme and rosemary and wild cyclamen that was the summer scent of his own hills. He could go back to all that now, to the hills and the people among whom he had been bred and for whom he had been so bitterly homesick here in the north. But if he did, would there not be another hunger on him all his life? For other scents and sights and sounds, pale and changeful northern skies and the green plover calling? Suddenly he knew why Uncle Aquila had come back to this country when his years of service were done. All his life he would remember his own hills. Sometimes he would remember them with longing, but Britain was his home. That came to him not as a new thing, but as something so familiar that he wondered why he had not known it before. Cub thrust a cold muzzle under his hand, and he drew a long breath and turned once again to the others. Uncle Aquila stood still with arms folded and huge head a little bent, looking on with that air of detached interest. My congratulations, Marcus, he said. It is by no means everyone for whom my friend Claudius will sweat as he must have sweated to drag justice out of the Senate. I could lay my head on his feet, Marcus said softly. It is a new beginning, Aska. Of course, it will take a little time to work the exchange, said Uncle Aquila thoughtfully, but I imagine that you should be back in Etruria by autumn. I shall not go back to Etruria, Marcus said. I shall take up my land here in Britain. He looked at Cotia. She was standing just as she had stood ever since he began to read the legate's letter, still and waiting as a winter-bound withy. Not Rome, after all. But you did say, anywhere? Did you not, Cotia sweet? He said, holding out a hand to her. She looked at him for an instant, questioningly. Then she smiled, and making a little gesture to gather her mantle, as though she were quite prepared to come now, anywhere at all, put her hand into his. And now I suppose that I shall have to arrange matters with Kaiso, said Uncle Aquila. Jupiter, why did I ever realize how peaceful life was before you came? Why did I never realize how peaceful life was before you came? That evening, having written to the legate for both of them, Marcus had wandered up to join his uncle in the watchtower, while Aska went to arrange about getting the letter sent. He was leaning at the high window, his elbows propped on the sill, his chin in his hands, while behind him Uncle Aquila sat squarely at the writing table, surrounded by his history of siege warfare. The high room held the fading daylight in a cup, but below in the courtyard the shadows were gathering, and the rolling miles of forest had the softness of smoke, as Marcus looked out over them to the familiar wave-lift of the downs. A down country. Yes, that was the country for farming. Time for bees. and good grazing. A thyme for bees and good grazing. Maybe even a southern slope that could be terraced for vines. He and Eska, and what little labor they could afford. Little enough that would be at first, but they would manage. Farming with free labor would be an experiment, but it had been done before, though not often. Eska had given him a distaste for owning human beings. We have been talking it over, Eska and I, and if I have any choice in the matter, I am going to try for land in the down country, he said suddenly, still with his chin in his hands. I imagine that you should not have much difficulty in arranging that with the powers that be, said Uncle Aquila, searching for a mislaid tablet among the orderly litter on his table. Uncle Aquila, did you know about this? Beforehand, I mean? I knew that Claudius intended bringing your names before the Senate, but whether any result would come of it was quite another matter, he snorted. Trust the Senate to pay its debts in the old style. Land and sesterces, as much land and as few sesterces as may be. It comes cheaper that way. Also one Roman citizenship, said Marcus quickly. Which is a thing apart from price, though not costly in the giving, agreed Uncle Aquila. I think they need not have economized on your gratuity. Marcus laughed. We shall do well enough, Eska and I have no doubt of it. Always supposing that you do not first starve, you will have to build and stock, remember? Most of the building we can do ourselves. Wattle and Daub will serve until we grow rich. And what will Kotia think of that? Kotia will be content, Marcus said. Well, you know where to come when you need help. Yes, I know. Marcus turned from the window. If he should need help, really need it, after 3 bad harvests, I will come. Not until then. Not until then. No. Uncle Aquila glared. You are impossible. You grow more and more like your father every day. Do I? Marcus said, with a glint of laughter, and hesitated. There were some things that it was never easy to say to the older man. Uncle Aquila, you have done so much for Eska and me already. If I had not had you to turn to. Bah! Said Uncle Aquila, still searching for his missing tablet. No one else to turn to me. No son of my own to plague me. He found the tablet at last, and began with delicate precision to smooth the used wax with his quill pen, evidently under the impression that it was the flat end of his stylus. Suddenly he looked up under his brows. If you had applied for that exchange, I believe I should have been rather lonely. Did you think I would be away back to Clusium on the first tide? I did not think so, no, said Uncle Aquila slowly, looking with surprised disgust at the wreck of his quill, and laying it down. You have now made me ruin a perfectly good pen and destroy several extremely important notes. I hope you are satisfied. No, I did not think so, but till the time came and the choice was between your hands, I could not be sure. Nor could I, Marcus said, but I am sure now. All at once, and seemingly for no particular reason, he was remembering his olive wood bird. It had seemed to him, as the little flames licked through the pyre of birch bark and dead heather on which he had laid it, that with the childhood treasure all his old life was burning away. But a new life, a new beginning, had warmed out of the grey ash, for himself and Eska and Kotia, perhaps for other people too, even for an unknown downland valley that would one day be a farm. Somewhere a door slammed, and Eska's step sounded below in the colonnade, accompanied by a clear and merry whistling. Oh, when I joined the Eagles, as it might be yesterday, I kissed a girl at Clusium before I marched away. And it came to Marcus suddenly that slaves very seldom whistled. They might sing if they felt like it, or if the rhythm helped their work, but whistling was in some way different. It took a free man to make the sort of noise Esco was making. Uncle Aquila looked up again from mending the broken pen. Oh, by the way, I have a piece of news that may interest you, if you have not heard it already. They are rebuilding Isca dum Noniorium. End of Rosemary Sutcliff's The Eagle of the Ninth, 1954.